John Stuart Mill, a prominent British philosopher and political economist of the 19th century, is renowned for his influential writings on liberty, utilitarianism, and women's rights. Born in 1806, John Stuart Mill didn't have a normal childhood. He started learning Greek at the age of 3, and by the age of 8, he was already studying algebra, science, logic, and economy. He was groomed to be a philosopher by his father James Mill and his godfather Jeremy Bentham. Bentham and Mill were the foremost members of a group called the Philosophical Radicals, who were united by their commitment to utilitarianism, a liberal philosophy committed to the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Utilitarianism maintained that you could judge whether an action is morally right or wrong by the amount of pleasure or pain it produces. This principle would later form the foundation of Mill's ethical and political philosophy. By age 15, John had read hundreds of works in Greek, Latin, and English, but he never attended any school or college, nor did he have any friends his age because his father believed they would interfere with his education. At 17, he entered employment at the East India Company. He continued working for the company for over 30 years. The job provided a steady income and left him sufficient time to write. In his early 20s, Mill suffered a period of serious depression during which he came to believe that his rigorous intellectual training had left him emotionally underdeveloped. Yet, he emerges from this period of depression. By his own account, he repaired himself with poetry, in particular, the poetry of William Wordsworth. This personal struggle with mental health caused Mill to reevaluate utilitarianism. What is happiness? Mill thought that it was more than simply pleasure, as Bentham and his father had stated. In his famous book, Utilitarianism, published in 1861, John Stuart Mill defended his own views on utilitarian ethics. Before Mill, Jeremy Bentham believed that pleasure can be quantified mathematically, so that moral judgments could be made based on how much pleasure or pain an act would produce. He formulated felicific calculus, or hedonistic calculus. The amount of pleasure derived from an act could be measured by variables like intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, fecundity, purity, and of course the number of people that will be affected. His critics called utilitarianism a pig philosophy, suggesting that Bentham's logic predicts people would sit around eating or chasing base pleasures all day. The problem was that Bentham had said that the quantity of pleasure being equal, pushpin, a popular children's game at the time, is as good as poetry. To illustrate the problem, consider this thought experiment. Imagine you are a soul in heaven waiting to be allocated a life on earth. An angel comes and offers you a choice between two lives, that of the composer Joseph Haydn and that of an oyster. You can choose to live a full, active, and successful human life, or you can choose to live a mildly pleasant oyster's life. To make the choice more difficult, the angel tells you that if you choose Haydn's life, it will last just 77 years, but the oyster lives forever. The problem is that no matter how much pleasure is derived from the life of Haydn, if the oyster lives forever, at some point the amount of pleasure it has experienced will have surpassed that of Haydn. Yet almost all would still choose the life of Haydn. Mill's answer to this problem is that some pleasures are intrinsically more valuable than others, and that once we are aware of certain higher pleasures, we won't be happy to leave them uncultivated. He wrote that it is better to be a human dissatisfied than a pig satisfied, better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied, and if the fool or the pig is of a different opinion, it is only because they only know their own side of the question. Mill then lays out a principle to differentiate between higher and lower pleasures. A pleasure is of higher quality if people would choose it over another pleasure, even if it is accompanied by discomfort, and if they would not trade it for a greater amount of the other pleasure. Utilitarianism also has been criticized as justifying the murder of one person if it maintained the happiness of two. But Mill would say that utilitarianism is more subtle than that. A society that isn't sure whether one of its members could be murdered at any time by the government just for the sake of another's happiness would surely be a less happy society than the one where everyone is protected. In his attempt to unite the philosophy of utilitarianism with the safeguarding of liberal rights and protecting the individual from the tyranny of the majority, in 1859 John Stuart Mill published On Liberty. It is probably the most influential work on freedom of speech ever written. During the 19th century, most Western societies extended voting rights. Mill saw that the political system was becoming increasingly identified with the will of the people, but there was no serious doctrine that laid the principles that protected the people from a government of themselves. If a majority is in power, what stops them from democratically oppressing the minority? Mill writes, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community, against his will, is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign." Mill thus disqualifies other reasons that are often used to justify interference with individual liberty. The harm principle excludes paternalism, or constraining an individual's freedom for the sake of what one believes to be that individual's own benefit. Instead, Mill argues that each individual should be able to decide what constitutes his or her own good and how he or she will pursue it. Similarly, actions cannot properly be constrained because they will cause offense rather than harm to other people. In defense of freedom of expression, he wrote, "If all mankind minus one were of one opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind." He thinks that to silence an opinion, even if it's false, is wrong. If that opinion is true, the silencers are deprived of learning that truth. And if it's false, they lose the clearer perception and livelier impression of the truth produced by its collision with error. We can never be 100% certain that the opinion we try to silence is false, and to claim to know for certain is the first step toward despotism. In 1830, Mill met Harriet Taylor, a married woman with whom he shared a close intellectual and emotional bond. Their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship after Taylor's husband's death. Their partnership became instrumental in shaping Mill's ideas on women's rights and gender equality. Mill's belief in the inherent worth and capabilities of women was strongly influenced by Taylor's intelligence, strength, and independent thinking. In 1851, together they published The Enfranchisement of Women, and in 1869, Mills published The Subjection of Women. In these books, he argued vehemently for gender equality and the liberation of women from oppressive social norms. He challenged the deeply ingrained patriarchal structures that denied women equal rights and opportunities. After retiring from the East India Company, Mill stood for election, and in 1865 became the Member of Parliament for Westminster. He often argued that government was a trust, and that representatives should act according to their own lights, rather than simply following the opinions of their constituents. During his single term in office, Mill made good on this view by adopting many controversial positions. His attempt to amend the Reform Act of 1867 to include suffrage for women and his support for anti-colonial policies did not endear him to his constituents, and he failed to win a second term. Mill died in 1873 in Avignon and was buried next to his wife. John Stuart Mill's philosophical ideas faced both admiration and criticism during his lifetime. While many hailed him as a visionary thinker who championed individual freedom and equality, others accused him of promoting a form of liberalism that undermined traditional values. However, Mill's advocacy for individual autonomy, intellectual freedom, and gender equality continues to shape contemporary discussions on human rights and social justice.